sober. You can still make some pills, taking care of the thing, light 100 damn candles. Won't stop them. Not if they decided they liked you. What are you doing now? Why are you... Oh, God damn it. Why? Why would you do that? We're going to talk about... Oh. Well, howdy, traveler. Come on in. Get inside. Get out the rain. Come on. You come on in now. Make yourself cozy. Here, take this blanket and you take a seat. I'll be right back. I'll bring you something warm to drink. It's coming down like cats and dogs out there. Why were you out in this storm? Listen, I'm mighty entertaining, but I don't think I'm that entertaining. Why the hell would you brave a storm just to come and see little old me? It just don't make sense, you saw. That's all I'm saying. Just doesn't add up, that's all. It's just, maybe it's my own sense of ego. Maybe I don't have one, but here, drink that. There you go. I don't know, maybe it just doesn't make much sense to me why people would brave a storm just to come say hello to old shallow graves. Oh, yeah. I suppose that makes sense. Story, huh? It's funny you came by when you did. I actually just heard a story the other day. I met a fella and told me the whole thing. It's an interesting story. A lot to do with shelter, actually. Some folks never leave their shelter, whether it be by choice or fear. And others just don't really have a choice. I suppose those folks, well, they just gotta accept. The story's about a fella named Simon. And Simon was one such individual who just had to accept. He had spent the last decade of his life in bed. You'd be surprised by just how much he learned there. And mostly, though, he learned to accept things. He accepted the world for what it was, instead of what he'd have made of it. Simon's world began at the door and ended at the window on the wall across from him. In between were yellow and plaster walls and the stone that peeked through the bits where chunks were missing. He could somewhat recall a vague memory when he'd first woken up in this room of the walls back then. They were so bright he thought he'd died and gone to that next place. But as his eyes focused and his senses flooded back, he realized he was in a room that lacked any trace of personality. He was in a hospital. He could not recall what events had transpired that led him to his infirm status, only that one instant he was not here, and the next, here he was. If that lack of clarity frustrates you, friend, then you'll just have to accept that. Simon did. There was a crack in the ceiling over his bed, like a dead vein. He'd watched that crack grow little by little, day by day. It near reached the center of the room now. There was no clock in this room, which made telling time difficult, but not impossible. The obvious solution was to keep track of the sky through the window, and that was fine for telling the time of day, but when it came to what day of the week it was, he was at a loss. You might ask, why would it matter? He's stuck in that bed no matter what, knowing what day it was wouldn't change that. And you'd be right. But the mind is like a water skin, only rigid if it's got something in it. Having something as simple as a calendar on the wall might have changed this story, but this is the story I heard. So this is the story I'm telling you. Simon seemed to have been assigned 2 nurses who took turns tending to him, Miss Marigold and Miss Gretchen. One or the other would come by and give him his injections. He couldn't ask what it was they were pumping him full of, but he'd learned to accept that. His favorite nurse was Miss Marigold. She was kind, and she talked to him. She would tell him of her days. After all this time, all these years spent in this room, listening to Marigold's tales, her wants, her losses, her victories, even her trials, he figured he probably knew her better than most did, maybe even better than her husband. He wasn't much of a talker anymore, though. He used to love spinning a good yarn. Now, his skills leaned more towards listening. He had been there for Miss Marigold when her mother passed. She had told him about that. He had listened when she had met Tom, and he wished he could smile when Tom proposed. He had been there when Miss Marigold came in with the good news, too. She was pregnant, and he was there when she came back with that vacant look in her eye. He could feel it across the room. He wanted so badly to reach out and touch her cheek and tell her it was going to be all right, but he couldn't, and he accepted that, too. Miss Marigold and Simon grew to be close friends, or at least as close as two people can get within a one-sided conversation. Nurse Gretchen would pay him visits too, though she was far less pleasant compared to Marigold. She was louder, and she liked helping him to chew faster. "Come on now, Peggy. I've got other duties to tend to. You think you're the center of my world, do ya? I've got precious little time, and you want to chew like the day has no end. Now chew!" Simon could chew just fine. He didn't need any help with that, or what precious little else was left in his control. He could breathe on his own, and he assumed his heart still worked. The alternative was just too confusing to consider, but the rest of his body was non-compliant. He was like a puppet without any strings. What are we? Simon had a lot of time on his hands these days, and that question, that infinite and torturous question, puzzled Simon to no end as he watched the seconds of his life drift by from his bed. Where do I end and my body begin? Oftentimes it felt like Simon was more or less just watching his life, like a picture show. It was his opinion after years of forced observation that that wasn't much different from a normal life. His mind was alive and capturing the images his eyes observed, but there were no strings between he and his puppet, because he wasn't his puppet. That became obvious to him as time went on. This ineffable he was whatever was drawing these conclusions in the black bits of his brain. His body was only a tool this world gave him to express these conclusions. Why? Why do people bother to express such complex ideas at all, he wondered, to inflate a sense of self-importance? He thought back to before and remembered how so many men would call attention to themselves without saying it outright. He thought about the strange mating rituals of beautiful birds and how the male would dance for his prospective mate. Humanity had much in common with birds, he found. Men flaunted their many variations of feathers in one form or another, the most common being strength. That wasn't Simon's way, though. His feathers were three-syllabled words that made other men scratch their heads and their wives blush. For a moment, Simon saw a caricature of how he must have sounded years ago. Look at me, I said. Look how deep my mind extends. Truly, I am an endless well of contemplation and revelation, if you couldn't tell. What a marvel I am. But Simon didn't care about that now. He'd have settled for being able to say just one word. Fuck would do nicely. That one word would be infinitely more enjoyable than saying nothing at all. There are at least a dozen ways to enunciate the word fuck. You can express happiness, surprise, sadness, anger, attraction, sickness, all with one syllable. Simon couldn't think of another word that was so malleable, and he thought about it a lot. If Simon could say fuck, he'd never stop saying fuck. He'd say it every way he could think to say it. He'd sing the fuck song, and he'd chant the fuck chant, and he'd scream the fucking war cry, and he'd laugh like a fucking madman every time he did, because Simon knew what the fuck it was to be disconnected. He knew what it was to be adrift with no anchor. To Simon, a day wasn't just a day anymore. Time would stretch between visits from nurses. A single day could feel like an eternity. All it took was a blink, and suddenly he was being washed down and scrubbed by Miss Gretchen, wishing she'd go a little gentler around his plums. She was always in an awful rush to finish her tasks and vanish, like she couldn't stand Simon's small world. As far as he was concerned, Miss Gretchen was welcome to take her leave and stay gone in her own world. The world that resided on the other side of that window across the room. Simon had hated that window at first. It wasn't until a storm was on the rise and the nurses had to board it up that he realized just how flat and dark his world was without it. Time grew strange and warped without the window. Miss Marigold made sure to light his room during the days with a lantern and candles, but the effort rang hollow by comparison. He estimated the window was closed for about a week, though he couldn't be sure. But in that time, he discovered something. Simon was afraid of the dark. But this wasn't just any darkness. It was a perfect darkness. It felt heavy, oppressive even. He'd catch something moving in the corner of his eye, and when he'd try to catch a glimpse, it would vanish. In that dark, Simon began to feel things differently. Sensations began to blur, and so did memories. His world turned black and empty and cold. Given no other choice, he receded into his mind, where he counted the seconds until the nurses would visit. Didn't matter which of them, compared to the darkness, even Miss Gretchen was a welcome reprieve. The day the light came back was a good day. Simon felt like he was going to weep as they removed the boards and a ray of light broke through the dusty room. "You happy to have your window back?" Miss Marigold asked as she spooned his morning oatmeal into his mouth. "It's a beautiful view." He looked at her and tried to say, "Talk to me," with only his eyes, which sounds rather hard to do, but in reality is much harder. But Simon seemed to have mastered his own technique. "I went to the market yesterday. Bought fresh cherries. The prices were ridiculous, of course, what with the pillar's taxes on imports. Did you know they don't grow cherries here? Think of it, a city named Cherry Hill, and they can't even grow cherries." Simon wanted to tell her it was because the hills sprouted pink and red with cherry blossoms when the settlers of this land first saw it. That's why they called it Cherry Hill, but the ground wasn't fertile enough to grow anything of substance here. He wanted to tell her he knew this because of his time spent in the agricultural office. He was a clerk there once, tasked with logging soil reports and drafting proposals that no one ever read. Miss Marigold's eyes dropped to her soft-looking hands. Simon already knew what she was thinking about, and he'd been waiting for her to talk about it. "I found a baby rattle for sale, too. Simple little thing. Silver. It was just like the one I bought for—" She didn't finish. She swallowed hard. "I sold it, you know. I did. And I don't regret it. I kept it the first 2 times we tried, but after the third, I just didn't see a point." Simon wanted to share his own experience with her. He and his wife had struggled to have a child too. Then one day she gave him the news. She was pregnant. She thought it was a boy, and they were happy. A week later, he'd woken up in this room. That was nearly 10 years ago. It was a boy, so she had told him in one of her last visits. The thought of Simon's son being raised by a stranger almost entered his mind, but he pushed it down first, and he accepted. Nurse Marigold's eyes went misty, and he assumed his eyes were doing the same thing because she sucked her teeth and dabbed his eyes with a napkin, then wiped her own. "I'm sorry. Look at me, complaining to you." "Please go on," Simon pleaded with his eyes. Her shoulders dropped, and for the first time she looked smaller than the room. Her eyes wandered and found the sky in the window. "It is a beautiful view." And then a look came over her. She raised a brow at him like a devious thought had hatched in her mind. "When I get to feeling this way, I usually want to break something. I wanted to break a glass over my husband's head the other day. He said something that, but that wouldn't be ladylike of me. Wouldn't be proper, as my mother would tell me. So I break other things instead." She leaned closer to him and dropped her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've found that rules are the safest thing to break in times like these. Would you like to break a rule with me?" It had been years since Simon had been outside that building, but Miss Marigold had helped him into a wheelchair and taken him through the halls during the hospital lunch hour. It was a quiet day, and there were only a few other nurses there who gave a knowing smirk as they passed. Luckily, Nurse Gretchen was nowhere in sight that day. As she opened the doors and wheeled him outside, Simon felt the warmth of the sun on his skin again. She could have taken him to the front of the building, where the cobblestone streets were no doubt filled with crowds. Instead, she had wheeled him out the back. A wide open and green field, lush trees lined the sides. A stone path snaked through the rows of yellow and blue flowers. It was calm, but not quiet. A gust of wind rustled through the trees, and the leaves danced together. The telltale knocking of a woodpecker came from somewhere in the thick woods. Cherry blossoms blew in the wind, and the smell of a world preserved both by and from man filled his nostrils. This would make a lovely memory to look back on later. A memory unlike the rest, locked safely away in a little box he kept just for himself. It was beautiful, and he couldn't have been happier or more grateful to his friend for this. Until she squatted down in front of him, and she had that look in her eye again. "I'm leaving," she said. "My husband and I are getting out of the city. Says there's more work out there." Her head dropped. "I'm sorry, Simon." Emotions never came one at a time anymore. Grief often arrived holding hands with gratitude now, and Simon had learned to accept that too.
Gods above, she really did leave me with you, didn't she? As if she's the only thing that matters. Never did like that one,
Nurse Gretchen muttered, slamming down a pan of water.
You think I don't have better things to do? You think I want to sit in this stone crypt, wiping dribble off your chin while the world spins on outside?
Simon stared at the ceiling. For all its blandness, it had more hue and depth than any one statement Nurse Gretchen had ever uttered.
You just lay there like a big damn lump, she snapped. Bet you love this. Bet you live for the attention. Poor piggy in his sty getting fat off pity and porridge.
He tried to ignore her. He was usually so good at that, but today was different. Simon's thoughts were filled with loss, voids in the shape of people. His wife, his son, Nurse Marigold. There was even one shaped after himself. Accept. Just sit back and accept, he told himself.
Laziness, that's what it is. Marigold with her little problems, as if hardship gives her a pass to do as she likes. I heard about your little excursion, you know. Oh yes, you can safely say that won't be happening again, not on my watch.
Except she'll leave soon.
Regardless, she'd have made a dreadful mother anyway.
Simon could see the rest of his life stretched out in front of him. It was flat and straight and long. The path was paved with the word accept. Nurse Gretchen's poisonous words fell over the path like rain, eroding it all. There was only one word that came to his mind. It was a 4-syllable word he'd have used in his old life. Apoplectic. He thought it sounded like something a well-educated and rabid dog might snarl, and in his heart, Simon began to let go of acceptance. He looked at Nurse Gretchen, at her pocked complexion and crusty mouth corners, that piece of flesh that dangled beneath her chin, those foul brown teeth, and the more foul words she made with them. He hated her. He hated Nurse Marigold for leaving him. He hated the world for taking everything away from him. He hated his wife, for her last words to him were not kind, and they were not soft. They cut like a red-hot knife and spilled his heart over the floor of this room that he also hated. "I'm sorry, Simon. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep coming back and seeing you like this. It's too painful." Too painful, she had said, as if she were visiting a corpse long dead. Not her husband of 6 years, not the boy who had tied her bootlaces when they were little, who had chased her between the church pews as they grew, who had made love to her under the stars the night he asked her to marry him. She had said it was too painful. Above all else, he hated Nurse Gretchen. All his rage and anger and humiliation was focused on her. He looked at her. That fat bitch stood there as if she was better than him just because she could stand, just because she could speak. He imagined her neck snapping, her eyes bursting and running down her plump cheeks like runny eggs, her lungs folding in on themselves, her ribs crushing, and her organs spilling out her own backside. What a funny face she would make as she tried to hold herself together. Simon did not accept this fate. For 10 long years he had accepted. He'd forgiven. He'd turned the other cheek. He had thanked them with his eyes for feeding him slop and mopping up what remnants spilled from his ass, for fueling his detached puppet his essence was trapped in. Because, well, what else was he to do? Get up and make the world apologize? Hold down everyone else who made him feel so very, very small? He knew better, but he still wanted to. There was no gust of wind, but the lantern guttered on the hook, casting shadows that stretched far too long across the floor. Simon's breath came slow and shallow. His heart raced. Gretchen stopped mid-rant. She looked like she just noticed a tidal wave heading straight for her. She fumbled at her neckline, pulling free a strange pendant he'd seen only once before, tarnished silver, but he couldn't make out the details. She clutched it tight, whispered words that didn't sound like any language Simon had heard before. Her lips touched the cold metal, and she tucked it away again. Her face had changed. Gone was the sneer, gone the contempt. What remained was something far more unsettling. Fear. She looked at Simon, really looked at him, like she was seeing him for the first time. As the days passed, Nurse Gretchen seemed to fall into a more predictable routine. She fed him on time. She gave him his injections in the mornings. She went easier on him when it was time for his bath, which both he and his plums were grateful for. She even managed to smile on occasion. She began telling him good morning when she came in. She couldn't hold a candle to Marigold, but for whatever reason, she decided to soften a bit. They were getting on well enough until one day she pushed the door open and proclaimed, "There's a storm coming." There was no good morning today. Felt kind of nice getting back to old habits for a moment, but his stomach sank at the thought of his window being boarded up again. Gretchen was holding a bundle of heavy wooden boards beneath one arm, a hammer in the other. "It's going to be a nasty one," she muttered as she crossed the room to the window. "Not just rain. This one's different. You feel it, don't you?" She didn't wait for an answer. "In the air, in your bones." Simon's eyes went straight to the window, the only window, his only marker of time, his only glimpse of the world beyond this room. He remembered what it was like when it was all boarded up the first time, and the thought of losing it again made his chest tighten. Bang, bang, bang went the hammer as Gretchen began. Nails bit through wood like teeth into flesh. She was talking more than usual now. "It's not just the weather," she said. "I know what it is. I felt it the other day when you looked at me." Simon didn't know what she was on about. He had looked at her with hatred in his eye, and he'd assumed that might have something to do with the shift in treatment. But this was different. Bang, bang, bang. One board left. She paused and turned to face him. There was a strange glint in her eye. "I need you to know something," she whispered, stepping closer to his bed. "I felt something the other day when you looked at me. You wanted me dead. I saw it in your eye. I felt it in my heart. I was afraid, yes, but more than that, I was in awe. I saw you, what you are." She reached into her coat and produced a rusty tin box. Her fingers lingered on the latch. Before she opened it, she leaned close, so close he could smell the sour rot on her breath, and pulled the necklace from beneath her blouse. The pendant was a tarnished silver emblem, an eye with tentacle-like strands dripping down from it like tears.
"This is the order I belong to,"
she said, pulling the necklace free.
"We are the witnesses. We keep the old vows of the Veil Bleeders. We see what others won't. We serve the pattern. And when we find one like you,"
her voice softened to reverence,
"we bring you home."
She turned and looked out the portion of the window that was left open.
"In the old world, they would sever your limbs, cut you off as much as possible from the physical world. They would remove your eyes and puncture your eardrums. They would force you to exist within the pattern and speak messages from the other side to we mortals. It was a great and horrific honor."
Simon's blood turned to ice. He felt like he was in the bottom of a very deep well and screaming, "You're insane, Gretchen! You're mad!" And then she opened the box. Inside, a needle and syringe, and a vial of dark blue liquid.
"This will help,"
she said softly as she tied the cloth tight around his arm.
"It'll bring the sight forward, bring you forward."
She tapped the syringe. The dark blue fluid trembled inside. The cold tip of the needle sat against his flesh.
"Don't do this, Gretchen! Don't put that in me!"
he screamed with his eyes. And she smiled. It was soft and monstrous.
"I know. It's all so exciting."
She inhaled, trying to calm her own nerves.
"Just a little poke."
She slipped it into his vein and pressed the plunger home. It was like a single drop of ice-cold water dripped at the top of his head and rippled down his face, his arms, down his body all the way to his toes. It washed over him like a wave pulling away from shore, dragging every piece of him deeper into the swell. His skin buzzed, his thoughts scattered like marbles dropped on a stone floor. The shadows on the ceiling began to move. The crack above him bent wrong. Threads of darkness bloomed outward like the roots of an old tree. His heart thundered. His lungs caught fire. It felt like falling upwards into that crack. The lantern's flame thinned to a blue pin. Smoke should curl. This smoke hung, like it too was listening. The darkness pressed in, and then, just before it swallowed him, Gretchen boarded up the last sliver of light. The darkness pressed in from the corners. It spread like poisoned veins along the walls, and it thrummed like war drums in the deepest of caverns. The room was alive, with watchful eyes and whispering tongues. He wasn't sure if they were real at first, but after a while, Simon's understanding of real began to take on a new meaning. He could almost see something just out of sight. He'd have sworn it was a shelled creature with too many large eyes, each lidless and all too human. There was the shape of a small child hiding in the corner. He couldn't quite make her out, but he was sure it was at least imitating the cries of a little girl. She whispered things that made no sense to Simon.
Spitty Bill, Sharpie, Scaredy Cat, Matt Frown, Morrow, Spitty Bill, Sharpie, Scaredy Cat.
There were other things too. Things he didn't understand, things he saw and wished he hadn't, things that looked like people but weren't, things that whispered to him and asked him, "Are you real? Where are you? I can't see you." The worst of them was at the foot of his bed. It stood, pale-skinned, both moving and unmoving. Its eyes were empty, black holes. Simon thought they looked like bottomless wells. Below them was a tangled smile filled with moldy gums, jagged and uneven teeth, and a viscous phlegm that stretched in thick, glossy ropes. It held a bony finger to its lips and went still as a statue. It smiled, if you could call it that. Simon shut his eyes and slunk deeper into his mind than he'd ever dared venture before. But the creature's eyeless and smiling face greeted him there too. It had followed him. It was everywhere, in everything. That white face was all there was. From the eye socket sprouted a pair of hairy, insectoid legs. Then more, 8 hairy and thick legs attached to a bulbous and prickly body. Its legs twitched and gently pulled at the wrinkled white face as it crept down to the point of the crooked nose that hovered over Simon's. Then it dropped, spooling a wet thread from its belly as it descended down to Simon's cheek.
Well, howdy there. Sorry for that spook. You have a fresh face. Welcome to the neighborhood. Did you know you glow?
Simon's thoughts came two at a time, but through the mess of his mind came one above the rest. I want to go home. I want to leave.
Oh, don't you worry your pretty little head. You'll get to leave. Don't you stress about that, honey.
The spider replied. You can hear me? The spider turned around in a flash. Its legs whipped against his skin until it peered from its 8 black and unblinking eyes into Simon's.
Oh, we don't speak with our mouths here. We speak with our eyes. That's why I've got so many.
Simon tried to respond, but his mind was a bundle of panic and confusion.
It's all right. Are you frightened? It's okay to be a bit scared. This place is a frightful place at first.
Where am I?
Oh, it doesn't have a name. It's just kind of here.
The pattern.
That's what your kin call it. However, I've seen no repetition or rhythm, so the name makes no sense to me, but so do most things in your world.
Of all the things Simon had seen in this long night, he had hated the spider the most the moment he saw it. But as it spoke to him, he began to feel grateful for its company.
I've been watching you, not in a creepy kind of way, and I noticed you're a bit broken. So, does that bug you? No pun intended.
More than you can know.
Oh, that's just so sad. I cannot know your suffering, as I have never possessed a vessel myself. But to have a home for my soul and to be unable to use it, that would be vexing indeed.
Simon hesitated, as if his thoughts had weight now, like moving them cost something. What do you want from me? The spider tilted its body sideways, like a dog unsure of a command.
I only want what you want, to move, to speak, to make sense of your world.
It blinked, if you could call it that. Its black eyes, slick with impossible depth, collapsed in and out of themselves like holes folding inwards.
You're fractured, friend. Your soul and flesh no longer walk in tandem. That's why you ache. That's why you scream without sound.
Simon's chest tightened. The words, no, the truth of them, scraped something raw inside him. Can you fix it? The spider paused, its legs trembling slightly as if considering the question with great care.
I can stitch you back together, rebind soul to flesh, if that's what you wish.
How?
That's the simple part. All you gotta do is accept.
The spider began to descend further, its weight now fully pressed into the nape of Simon's neck. He could feel the warm pulse of its body, the itch of its barbed limbs.
You would not be alone anymore. You would not be weak. All you need do is accept. No one bears acceptance quite like you do, Simon.
He wanted to say no. He truly did. But more than that, he wanted to walk again. He knew what he would do if he could leave this little room. He'd find his wife. He'd meet his son. The spider returned to Simon's cheek and leaned forward over his eye. Its voice was soft now, almost kind.
Say yes, Simon, and I will make you whole.
Simon's mind was in chaos. Every thought pulling him a different way, wanting different things, pleading their own pleas, but they were all silenced by one word.
Yes.
The spider smiled, a smile more felt than seen. Then it turned around, showing its backside to Simon. He hadn't noticed it. Clusters of translucent cysts clung to its hairy back like leeches, some the size of pearls, others no bigger than pinheads, all twitching in time with his own heartbeat. They bulged and jostled as the spider moved, their skins stretched thin to reveal the shapes writhing inside. Tiny legs, hooked mandibles, blind, squirming things that pressed to be born. One quivered and then split. A sliver of clear fluid wept from the tear, and from that rupture, a pale larva spilled, limp and twitching on the corner of Simon's eye. They weren't just ready to hatch. They were eager.
Wait, no, I've changed my mind.
The spider spoke softly, as it always had.
I'm sorry, friend. Agreements made with beings such as I cannot be unmade. Calm now. It'll be over soon.
It reached out with one of its many arachnid limbs and parted Simon's lips, pushed his jaw open painfully wide. The spider crawled into his mouth. Simon gagged as the spider entered, eyes bulging, but his body was stone. He could feel the rigid firmness of the eight-legged horror drag itself inside. The barbed legs tickled his lips. They slid past his teeth. It chittered over his tongue and down into his throat. He tasted hair. It tasted like the color brown and something warm. The weight of it pressed deep, curling behind his tonsils, wedging itself like a secret. He felt the legs bend inward, curling up inside his chest. One final twitch beneath the ribs, then silence. It nestled deep within him, and from it Simon felt a warmth. It was not comforting. It was the warmth of steaming cow shit. It was the lukewarm heat of a stillborn baby. It was a rotten and decaying warmth, and from it Simon heard his own screams manifest. And within those screams, inside him, a new world came. A deep one with no end. A world he'd never seen. A small, infinite world within. The spider faded from his imaginings in an instant. Like a horrible dream he'd just roused from. He was falling. There was no wind rushing past him, no great blue sky above, nor ground below, but he was falling, right back into his body. His eyes flew open. He needed to cough, but of course it only came out in garbled chunks that threatened to choke him.
There, easy now,
Nurse Gretchen said, and raised him forward, patting his back. His head drooped over his chest, and he felt it coming, the slow sensation of vomit oozing back up through his body, and he was happy to be rid of it. A pile of yellowed porridge pooled on the blanket between his legs, and Gretchen wiped his mouth.
There now, feel better?
Gretchen asked with her newly acquired gentleness. He could see threads of light breaking through the boards over the window. He'd made it back from whatever hellscape Gretchen had sent him to, and he'd never been so happy to be back in his small, dusty world, or so angry. He felt like he was about to burst with all the rage pent up inside, but then Simon noticed something. The room felt cramped. The air felt thicker than usual with the scent of expensive vetiver pomade. The sound of ticking footfalls echoed around him, not the clicking of nurse heels, but the heavy ticking of a man's dress shoes. "Ah, most engaging," the man said. Simon couldn't see him while Gretchen had him slumped, but as she lay him back, she turned his head to the side. He was an aged man with the posture of a lamp pole. His hair was silver and oiled back, and his eyes were a bright green. He stood with his hands folded neatly behind his back, his head held high, and he looked down his pointed nose at Simon. "Tell me again, when did you say you injected him?"
5 days ago, sir,"
Gretchen said proudly.
"I monitored his vitals, and by the second day I contacted your office, sir."
5 days he'd been in that hole, but to Simon, it felt like 5 years. The old man bent forward and put his face uncomfortably close to Simon. "Sir, can you hear me?"
"He can't speak, sir. We use his eyes. Up is yes, down is no."
Sir, do you understand me?" Simon looked up. "Very good. Now, forgive me, but I must make sure your senses are not impaired. Is your name... Oh, bother, what was his name?"
"Simon Creddick, sir."
"Ah, yes. Is your name Simon Creddick?" Simon looked up again. Gretchen about laid an egg at that one. "Excellent. Now, Simon, you don't mind me calling you Simon, do you?" Simon looked down, but the prick didn't seem to notice. "Simon, are we in the year 1942? Simon looked down. "Are we in the year 1861? He looked down again. "Are we in the year 1891? Simon looked up and up again and again. Finally, yes. "Very good." He pulled a small notebook from his jacket and scribbled something down, then snapped it shut.
"Well?"
Nurse Gretchen asked.
"Is he—"
"Step back, Mum," said another man Simon hadn't seen yet, a black coat by the look of him, but he wore a metal mask and a hood. Simon had only seen uniforms like that on high-status guards, like the guards of the... "My name is Pillar Corbin Day. I'm very pleased to meet you, Simon. I'm sure you no doubt have many questions of your own, given the amateur nature of this test performed on you," he said, and sneered over his shoulder at Gretchen. "But I have one final question for you. Before your waking up here with us, you found yourself in a strange place. I've never been there myself, but it has been described to me many times. Tell me, Simon, did anything speak to you while you were there? Did anything perhaps offer you a bargain?" Simon neither looked up or down. He wasn't sure he liked the way Day was looking at him. He was suddenly reminded of how his wife never wanted to go shopping without him, how every man on the street would look her up and down, undressing her with their eyes. Day looked at Simon this way, as if he could see into him and wanted what he saw. "Simon," Day said, regaining his attention, "were you offered a bargain?" He didn't know if there was a right or wrong way to answer, but Simon had never been much good at lying. So he looked up. Yes. Day took Simon's hand in his. A gold signet ring with 4 pillars sat on his pinky. "And did you accept?" "Yes." Just then, as Simon looked up, he felt something, a faint twitch in his index. Day's eyes shot down to their hands. He felt it too. His eyes warmed by a fraction, enough to be terrifying. Simon's mind reached back to the memory of the spider, of its words. It had said it would link soul to flesh. "Very good," Day said and stood. He looked down at Simon with a strange satisfaction in his eye. Gretchen's mouth was agape.
"Oh, sweet saints! He's—"
"A seer," Yes. Gretchen gasped and raised her hand, middle and forefinger outstretched. She touched them gently to the tip of her tongue, the same holy gesture the men of the cloth make. Simon had never seen the bitch this excited about anything. She looked positively elated. She near shoved past Day and took Simon's hand.
Oh, dear sweet seer, I'm so sorry. Sorry for what I did, and what I had to do. Please forgive me, I didn't know.
She bowed her head before him like a nun in confession. Just then, Pillar Day nodded to the masked black coat. As soon as his hands were on her, she was flailing. She reached back in panic, slapping and clawing at the metal mask he wore. Pained little whimpers caught in her throat. And then her neck snapped, and her body went limp, her arms swaying like cut strings at her sides. Her eyes blinked furiously. Her expression was clear. She was shocked. Her eyes met Simon's. He could still see her in there, scared, alone, confused. He didn't mean to think it, but somewhere in between the shock and horror of it all, the words rang crystal clear. "Welcome to my world." She fell to the floor like a limp sack of potatoes. Probably not all the way dead yet. She would still be in her body for a minute or two more. "Take care of the body," the pillar said. It was only now, as Day peered at him from the corner of his eye, that Simon felt properly introduced to the man. Pillar Corbin Day. He didn't smile. He didn't look satisfied or proud. He just looked assured. Day slowly turned back to Simon, his hands still folded behind his back. He leaned forward again, his bright green eyes interlocked with Simon's. "We are going to make historic discoveries together, Simon." Day gave a solemn nod, and Simon could still feel his fingers twitching. He wanted to curl his hand into a fist and raise it high in the air, because for the first time in years, Simon didn't feel acceptance bearing down on him so heavily. There was a sliver of something else now. A second word set its teeth. Refusal. Well, there it is. I ain't a huge fan of the rain, if you couldn't tell. Too many unpleasant memories. Not a fan of telling stories indoors either, but we make do with what we've got, don't we? Circumstances. Sometimes we don't have any other option but to accept them, huh? There's times like this, I reckon, I can get a pretty clear picture of what it must have been like for Simon on those long nights without his window. I might not have the vocabulary he did, but one word comes to my mind when I think about that. Uncomfortable. Which is what we're fighting, ain't it, traveler? That's why you're here with me, bundled up and cozy. Good. That's why I'm here too. To be a voice in the dark. Maybe not always for you, but definitely always with you. You stay here as long as you like. You get some rest. And tomorrow when I wake up, I'm sure as hell gonna give some thanks that I can stand. Might even climb a tree if the weather's right. Just 'cause I still can. You rest easy now, and keep your fire lit, 'cause we ain't alone out here. From Shallow Graves is owned and produced by Smug Rust Studios. Today's episode was written and performed by Red Edwards. You can find these stories on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're a fan and want to support the show, join our Patreon for early access, extended cuts, and behind-the-scenes fragments. Share your own whispers by joining us at R from Shallow Graves on Reddit and from Shallow Graves on Blue Sky. And don't forget to like, follow, and spread the word, whether it's on a feed or around your own campfire. Nothing travels farther than word of mouth. Thanks for listening.